thank you everyone for attending the Fall 2016 First Generation Faculty Lunch Workshop. I know a lot of you, I don't know all of you, which is exciting to me because it means that new people are coming and participating in our events. Just to let you know, my name is Anita Casavantes Bradford. I'm an associate professor of Chicano Latino Studies and History, and I'm the founder of the First Generation Faculty Initiative, which is now entering its third year. I also want to introduce Kevin Huey, who is the Director of Student Transition Services here at UCI. And he helps lead this initiative. And I want to thank him and his team for everything they do to support the first generation faculty, and more broadly for working with our first generation low-income and transfer students. So the first generation faculty is a campus-wide initiative which is supported by the Division of Undergraduate Education. So thank you and shout out to Dean Michael Denon. And it is for faculty who were first in the family to graduate from college, as well as faculty who are not themselves first gen, but who simply wish to be better educators, mentors, and advocates for our growing first gen population, which here at UCI is now slightly more than 60%. So that's amazing. We are not talking about a niche student population or a quote unquote minority population. We are talking about the new normal. That's who our first gen students are. The first generation faculty also recognizes that there's a strong demand for this kind of network and professional development opportunity and support amongst UCI staff and administrators who also work very closely with first gen students. And so we welcome their participation in all of our events. I know that Kevin Huey and Student Transition Services are working with the idea of a staff-centered initiative, so there will be more on that soon for those of you that are staff, but you are always welcome here as well. So this year, in addition to our usual 2 annual lunch workshops, which we hold in the fall and in the spring quarters, we're also partnering with UCOP, with the Office of the President, in a social media campaign which highlights the presence of first-generation faculty on our campus to celebrate their journeys, to acknowledge their academic accomplishments and their contributions to our campus. So I just want to show you some of the social media footprint that has been emerging around this social media campaign. So these are our first gen college grad t-shirts and buttons. We've had some Facebook Live broadcasts. I have a blog post up on the UC Medium. And we've asked faculty to post to social media their own interactions with our first gen swag. That's the Chancellor, Eloy Ortiz Oakley, who is now one of our regents and started at community college, then came here to UCI. And then different students and different directors and faculty and staff across campus. We've been asking faculty to pose with their own first gen students, wearing their first gen t-shirts, using the hashtag @firstgen, hashtag #FirstGenUCI. Those are some of my students, all of whom are STEM students but are currently taking a social sciences class on Latino childhood with me, and they are all first gen. And something we didn't expect, but which is so cool, is that UCI alumni have been jumping in on this and have been reposting their graduation photos and their own stories about I was first gen, now I'm a lawyer, all of these cool things that they're doing. So they're very excited about this as well. There's more. I don't know why it's not letting me scroll further. We've got professors in evolutionary biology and philosophy of science, all kinds of other cool places that have been posting these images. Professor David Igler was also featured in a photo campaign that we did at the beginning of the quarter, along with some other faculty, Manoj Kaplingat, Professor of Physics, Davin Phoenix, Professor of Political Science, Glenda Flores, Professor of Chicano Latino Studies, to just sort of get the story out that there are faculty members here, as well as staff and administrators, who were also the first in their family to go to college. So we're doing this for a couple of reasons. Our goal is, first of all, to encourage relationship building between first-gen students and faculty, because we know from the research that probably the most powerful indicator of success for first-gen students is building a meaningful relationship with at least one faculty member. We also want to raise positive awareness on campus and in the community about the amazing diversity and the potential of our first-gen student population. By doing this, we hope to counter the persistent deficit messaging that surrounds first-gen students, and especially low-income and students of color, that focuses on their struggles and their presumed lack of preparation for university without acknowledging the talent, the ambition, the work ethic, the resilience, and the courage that also defines these students, even when some of them do have deficiencies in their academic preparation. So as part of this social media campaign, we're providing first-gen faculty members with t-shirts like the one that I'm wearing, and we're asking you to wear them on campus throughout fall quarter. We're asking you to identify yourselves publicly in your classrooms as first-gen, and we're also asking you to invite students in your classes to take selfies with you, to post those photos on social media, or if you're not social media savvy, which I'm not really that social media savvy, send them to me, and I'll make sure that they are uploaded to #FirstGenUCI. For the less t-shirt and casually inclined, we have buttons. We also have door stickers, which were inspired by the AB 540 undocumented ally stickers that you see outside of the doors of faculty members who work with undocumented students. We have a first-gen college graduate sticker that we'd like you to post outside of your offices. And we just think this is a small but powerful way of making your presence known here at UCI. Another small but impactful way that we can help newly arrived first-gen students to feel more comfortable and less alone in their transition into this foreign country that we call the university. So if you're a first-gen faculty or a first-gen staff or administrator, and you haven't yet received your t-shirt, your button, or your stickers, during the last 10 minutes of our event today, we'll be passing them out. We're also going to hold an informal selfie session for those of you that haven't yet taken selfies. So you can put on your t-shirts, you can take a picture, and you can add it to our growing @FirstGenUCI media presence. For those of you who are here who are continuing generation students, but have attended at least one of our workshops and are committed teachers and mentors and advocates of first-gen students, we also have polo shirts that say first-gen faculty that you can wear to show that you are a member of our first-gen revolution here at UCI. So with that, let me thank you all for making time in your schedule to attend our event, and I would like to introduce our guest speaker. So our guest speaker today is Dr. Dee Gallo, who has prepared for you a workshop entitled Small Teaching, Good for the Many. Dr. Dee Gallo is the Executive Director for Instructional Development in the UCI Center for Engaged Instruction. Dr. Dee was also a first-gen student and a first-gen high school graduate. As a teenager, she alternated between homelessness and foster homes and overcame a uniquely difficult adolescence to graduate from high school early, and she headed straight for college, which, and I can relate as the child of a single welfare-dependent mother, I saw college, like Dr. Gallo did, as the way out of poverty and insecurity. She went on to earn an undergraduate degree in communicative disorders from the University of Redlands, a master's in professional writing, and a doctorate in higher adult and continuing education from USC. She started at UCI in 1986 as the course director for Writing 39B in the English department. She since moved on from the English department in 1989 to build and to now head what is the Center for Engaged Instruction. And we are so grateful to Dr. Gallo for developing this workshop, for sharing her story and her pedagogical expertise with us today. And we'd like to welcome you.
So I do have to correct one thing. I'm not sure that the insecurity part has gone away, but the finances have definitely gotten a little better. Today we're going to be talking about something that I call small teaching. Sometimes it's called slow teaching, and I'll give you a little bit of a definition of that in just a second. I also wanted to give my thanks to both Anita and to Kevin. I think it's so cool that we've got our own group. And I wish to heaven that I had something like this as an undergrad. Because like a lot of people, I sort of figured I was the only one in the position I was in, not knowing that there were probably a whole lot of other people, including my professors. One thing I wanted to point out, a little bit of a plug actually too. On your tables, there are flyers for the first teaching colloquium of this year. And our presenters are going to be from Disability Services Center. Dr. Jan Sarantino is the primary speaker, but she's going to be talking about how to help your students in more effective ways, especially if they learn in less traditional ways. Now, what's interesting about this is you might have heard that in connection with students with disabilities, there's something called universal design. And even though it's associated with students with disabilities, a lot of the principles behind it are really very applicable to just about every student. And I would say that's true also of what I call small teaching. And what I mean is we're going to talk about some really small strategies that you can use in the classroom, many of which you might already know about. So if it's redundant, just feel good that it's being reinforced. If it's new, so much the better. I'm going to share 7, some of which overlap, and I'm hoping that you're going to share some too. So I expect some participation, and I'm just going to assume that you're all going to give it to me. So when I ask you to participate, please do so. All right, we made up this term. Basically what it means is that there are things that don't necessarily require that you have a lot of fancy equipment or that you devote a lot of time and energy to thinking things up and planning things so that they happen just perfectly in class. But these are things that are small and, as I said, can impact a lot of different students. Some of them you already heard about. Wearing your t-shirt, taking a selfie and posting it to social media. Has anybody done anything else recently to help especially your first generation students to feel more welcome and comfortable in class? Anything that isn't already up there? Yes?
We have a program in the school where, and I think Anita talked about this last year as well, where students are asked to invite a faculty member to lunch, groups of 2 or 3 students. So we encourage that, and then we have them take a selfie following that lunch.
Who pays for lunch?
We do, the school does.
That's wonderful. Okay, let's try to get 2 more. Anybody else? Yes?
Just a very practical thing is students have jitters for their first midterm ever. So I aim to share that anxiety, and I just reinforce skills you already have.
Perfect.
Get a good night's sleep.
Yes, that's always a big one. That's kind of hard to do though when you're nervous. 1 more. Let's just get 1 more for right now. Yes?
So I tried something funky this quarter where I created an introduce yourself on the discussion board, and I thought no one was going to do it. And surprisingly, I had students, like I think about 80% of my class introduce themselves. They wrote paragraphs and posted pictures of their pets and pictures of themselves dressed up in Disney costumes and whatnot. And I think it really sort of gave a nice start to the class where they kind of all knew each other.
I'm really glad that you do that because sort of breaking down that sense of anonymity is really important. And that's actually a theme that's going to come through during this presentation. So one of the very first strategies that I recommend that you might want to try is telling on yourself. Anita mentioned that being in college is kind of like being in a foreign world or a different world. It really is, and I think part of what makes it so confusing at times is that it's different, but it seems familiar. You've seen it portrayed on TV, in the movies, you've talked to people who have gone to college, so it seems like it's something that you should know about, that you should know what the norms are and how you should behave. But that's not always the case. And let me illustrate this with an example. Every fall, my office, in addition to supporting faculty in their teaching, also supports graduate TAs. And we usually have a big campus-wide TA training. There are various places around the campus where the graduate students come to check in. I am often stationed right out in front of PSLH 100, which does not have a number on it. In fact, sometimes it's even hard to find the name of the building. SPOP, I think it's Student Parent Orientation Program, advises the students very well. And one of the things it tells them is go find your classroom before you actually need to be there so that you're not frantically looking around. And they do that, which is great. So more often than not, I get a lot of students wandering up with a map, kind of doing this and saying, can you please tell me where PSLH 100 is? And I'll say, yeah, it's right there behind me, where I put the big sign, you know, that says PSLH 100. But I know that most people are not going to look at a sign. Instead, they're going to look for a person, a human connection. And if that person is smiling, so much the better. Well, a couple of years ago, this one young woman just came hauling up to the table, stopped, took her breath. Can you please tell me where PSLH is? I'm late for my first class. And I said, well, first of all, catch your breath. You're okay because it's right here. Oh, thank God. I said, but you know what? You're actually early. Classes start tomorrow. And she went, I feel so stupid. And I said, no need to feel stupid. You're being really conscientious. That's great. You know where this room is. Let me tell you what I did my first week of class. So I told her, I'm really looking forward to my first week of class, especially my English class, because I love English. So I come in, I sit down, and kind of feels like everybody knows each other, sort of talking in a familiar kind of way. Professor gets up, he starts talking, and it's like, he's kind of talking like he's alluding to things that he's already talked about. So the next thing I know, he gives an in-class writing assignment, and it's like, I have no clue what he's talking about. So I very nervously got up, went up to him and said, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And he said, well, what's your name? And I said, D. Gallo, and he looked on his roster, and he said, well, you missed the first day of class on Tuesday. And I looked at him and I said, class started Tuesday? I like Thursday better. I thought Tuesday, Thursday meant Tuesday or Thursday. And I thought, oh, I just look like a total idiot. He was trying very hard to suppress a smile, bless his heart. He didn't quite succeed, but he said, you know what? There's really no reason why you should know that it's Tuesday and Thursday. Why would you know that? Nobody told you that, did they? And I said, no, they really didn't. And so if you read the email that went out that told you a lot more about me than I thought it was going to, most of the programs I've designed over the years are the direct result of my own naivete. And that was one of them. It's sort of like there's this expectation that you know this stuff. It seems simple, so God forbid you should open your mouth and let on that you don't know. So that was one of my gaffes. I'm going to ask you to take a couple of minutes at your table and see if anybody is willing to share a gaffe that maybe you committed during your first year of college. So take about 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and we'll see what you came up with. Okay, let's reconvene. Who heard a good one? What was a good one that came out from your table discussion? Somebody, you don't have to tell on yourself, tell on somebody else, just don't name them. Anita?
One of my fabulous colleagues missed a class and went to the professor the next week and said, did I miss anything important last week? Which you can imagine how well that went over with her professor.
Yes. Does anybody have a good rejoinder to that one when your students say it to you? Some people will just say, no, we didn't do anything important because you weren't there. And so we figured, you know, we'd better not because fill in the blank is not here to hear it. Yes?
Well, I try and get my students to talk more with each other, right? And to say, well, I think everything I have to say is important, but maybe your colleagues and classmates can help you understand better than I can what really matters from the perspective of the students. So you want to make friends with the person who sits next to you and be able to get their notes. Because really, I mean, there's always this disjunction, right? Things that I'm hitting really hard and it's over their heads or they already know it. They're, as a cohort, their best teachers.
Now you brought up a couple of things that actually you're going to see reflected in the 7 items that I'm bringing up, so I'm glad you mentioned them. Somebody else, one other table maybe? Want to share something juicy? Yeah?
I knew you had to apply for college, but I didn't know you had to apply to live in the dorms. So I knew I was going to school, but then a few months later I found out I didn't have on-campus housing, and I cried in the corner of my kitchen on the floor. And then I realized, oh, it's okay, people live off campus, but I felt, when I showed up, I felt like I was not going to have the college experience because I didn't live in a dorm, and it turned out to be fine, but I had no idea. I was so sad.
Well, and how many of you felt that if you did something wrong, that made you extremely vulnerable, that you might get kicked out because you did something wrong? I remember crying because I couldn't get into a course, and I thought I absolutely had to take it that quarter in order to keep my scholarship, that semester rather. And when I couldn't get in, to me it meant no money, no future. I mean, it meant big stuff. And I remember the lady at the registration desk, chewing me out and saying, young lady, you need to, be more mature about this. This isn't the end of the world. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, actually it is for me. But I also remembered walking away feeling very embarrassed, but I wasn't going to tell her why. One other one? Anybody else? Yes.
Well, I missed my first exam.
Oh.
Showed up on the wrong day, and it was embarrassing. I ran across campus and found the professor. He chuckled a little bit and handed me the exam and let me take it right then and there.
Oh, bless his heart. So we've all had good examples of where the faculty member, didn't chew us out, and instead was somewhat bemused by it, but let us make up for it. Maybe it's because we were really good at projecting either desperation or earnestness, but whatever we did, it worked. So thank goodness for those kinds of teachers. The other thing, and this is something that probably a lot of you do, is you talk about who or what might have inspired you to do what you do. So for example, I remember a counselor saying, hey, you want to take a paleontology class? And I'm like, don't know. What is that? And he said, oh, it's studying old bones. Well, that really got me excited, right? And I said, no, I think I'll pass on that one. So, sometimes we sit there as students and we think, why on earth would anybody have spent that much time in their lives learning about old bones or whatever it is that you all have devoted your life to doing? So I will say to them, say that you were nuts about dinosaurs as a kid. You had them on your pajamas. You had Tyrannosaurus Rex in your lunch box. You had decals all over the wall. Tell them that, because they like to know these things. It makes us more human. Sometimes it's a who. And I will often share with my students my who. I'm fortunate in that I do have several teachers, but this one is a different kind of teacher. Does anyone have an idea who this woman might be? And note how the question is worded, because we're going to come back to that. Anybody? Yeah, Kevin? Anne Frank? No, but you're close on the name.
Marie Curie?
No. Helen Keller? No. Pardon me? No. But you're all in the right ballpark about for the timing. And some of you are actually very close. She is part of a famous duo. And now what if I show you that picture? Let's see if you can see it. Almost got it. It's Annie Sullivan Macy, yeah. She's usually the half of the duo that most people don't talk a lot about. They talk a lot about Helen, but not necessarily Annie. When I recount this story to my grad students, in the pedagogy course, one of them pointed out to me what a huge impact the arts had on me. Because I went to see a play about the miracle worker when I was 7 years old. It was a high school production. And I was absolutely mesmerized by this woman. How the heck do you teach somebody who can't hear, can't talk, and can't see? That just didn't even occur to me that that was even possible. So I started learning a lot of things about her. And the more I learned about her, the more I kind of connected with her. So for example, she was born dirt poor. Her parents were illiterate Irish immigrants. She didn't have much family here in the US. Because she grew up in squalor, she developed trachoma, which essentially blinded her. She had some vision, but not much. Could have been completely avoided in a clean environment. Her mother died when she was pretty young, leaving her and her younger brother with an alcoholic father. He eventually gave up, said, I can't manage this. And they actually wound up in what they used to have, these poorhouses where debtors went, people who couldn't support themselves. But they also became warehouses for lots of other people, criminals, child molesters, people dealing with mental issues. So it was not exactly a great environment to wind up in, and there certainly weren't a lot of opportunities. But something fortuitous happened, actually two things. One was an older woman who was also there said to her, you need to get an education. That is the way out. And guess what? I've heard a rumor that some officials from the state are coming to do an inspection of the facility. You've got to let them know you're here and that you want out. And that's exactly what she did. What happened to her then was she went to the Perkins School for the Blind, but she was 14 years old in the first grade. You can imagine she was bullied quite a bit. She really felt like the proverbial fish out of water. She had no concept of what formal schooling was all about. However, when she graduated at age 20, took her a little while, she graduated as the valedictorian. But they never had a 20-year-old graduate, and they didn't know what to do with her until Captain Keller said, you know, I have a daughter, she can't hear, she can't see, she has no language. I need a teacher, please come and be her teacher. And that's how the thing got started. So she was my inspiration, and then I, fortunately, had a high school German teacher who thought that I was special. And that made all the difference. She took me to my first play, to my first opera, to my first ballet, things that I never would have been able to do on my own. So again, teachers come in here somewhere. I would like you to also share with one another for a few minutes an inspiration from your life, either a what that got you interested in your field or a person that gave you that motivation that said to you, you can do this, you can keep going. So please take a few minutes to do that. Make noise. Permission to make noise. Okay, let's reconvene. Let's hear some examples here. I think it's always fascinating when you look at people and you think, wow, that person really made it. It was probably easy for them. And then you find out that maybe it wasn't so easy after all. So how about some of your inspirations? How about someone from this table back there? I recognize a few faces back there. I expect you to talk. An inspiration.
Should I just repeat what I told the table?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to graduate and get a job. I never thought I'd become a professor one day. And I took a class with a professor, and I asked him, could I do some research in your lab? He said, yeah, sure, why don't you come on Monday? I actually work on Monday. How about Tuesday? You work? What do you do? Well, I'm a waiter on campus. Quit your job. You're an engineering student, you should work as an engineer. And I started working with him. I ended up working with him for 8 years. I got my PhD, and I'm here. So
Yay.
it was just nice. That's the only thing he did. It was just nice.
That's wonderful. It's that human touch again. Somebody else? Yes.
I was a waitress, so was on my lunch break and I brought in a magazine. I was raised to be a housewife and a mother, and that's what I was supposed to do when I grew up. And so I was waitressing. I was 20 and I was on my lunch break reading Good Housekeeping. And my boss came up to me and said, you shouldn't be reading that. He said, you are so much more than that.
And so that got you thinking other thoughts.
It certainly did. Yeah.
Yeah, so opened your horizons. Wonderful. One other? How about someplace over on this side? Yes.
So I'm from a really small town in eastern Washington State, and there were 20 students in my entire class.
Whoa.
And as a result of this, some of the teachers would move around and they'd switch grades during their tenure. And so we had one teacher in 3rd grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade for different subjects. And she was just somebody who would always push us because she knew what our strengths were and maybe what our weaknesses were that needed to be developed. So definitely she's someone I still keep in touch with.
And that continuity is really important. I know that some of you, we have a connection with Orangewood, which is a place for students who are homeless. And I remember one of the things that I was absolutely desperate about as a student was, please let me stay in this school district. You can move me to 6 different foster homes, but let me stay in this school district so the teachers know who I am, so they can write letters of recommendation for me. And that is really critical. So having some consistency and some stability really makes a difference too. Or if you're lucky, it's that one-off encounter where somebody says, hey, yeah, I think you can do this. So hearing people's stories, I think most of us like it. Again, it's that human touch, but it also says, you know what, it never even occurred to me that I could do this until somebody suggested that maybe I could. Now, there's something that I also call layering, which is the 3rd strategy. And this is where you can accomplish more than one goal at the same time. And it's just a term I made up. So one thing is that first day of class. Now, on the quarter system, most of us are trying to use every available minute that we can. But often the first day doesn't seem to be as complete as it possibly could be. I'm a big believer in icebreakers because I think it's important for people to start feeling comfortable in order to make it easier for them to talk, but they do take time. That first day of class, though, can be used in a couple of different ways. And one of them is to start teaching the subject. So I have an activity that I use called English Teacher, Probably a Virgin. You heard that I was an English teacher here first. And so my first day of class, I want to get the students talking, but I also want to teach them something about the content of the course. One of the things they need to learn is the difference between a fact and an inference. And sometimes they get the two confused. So I will say, all right, English teacher, probably a virgin, I want you to tell me every fact that you think you know about me. So they start giving me things. Wears a lot of makeup. Okay, that's a fact. Probably scary without it, okay? And I'll tell them, well, how do you know that? What would be evidence of that? And they say something like showing up at your house at 3 in the morning and then running screaming when you open the door. The second is wears a lot of jewelry. They usually say, she must be rich. Third, short. Yeah, well, not a short today. Probably a conservative. I don't know how they get that, but it does tend to come up. I'm not sure what the connection is. It's a little bit of an homage to a colleague of mine. His version of this activity was short, probably a Democrat, because he was about 5 feet tall. Clothes tend to match, compulsive. Has a PhD, compulsive. Organized, compulsive. Yeah, there's a bit of a theme here. So I have them do this, and we kind of go all over the map. One of the reasons I have them do it, well, actually, there are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of benefits for this. And what do you think some of them might be to doing the activity this way? What might they be? Yes?
You're building some rapport with your students so that they can know you as more than just their teacher and the lesson that you're giving them. You have this personal connection with them, building a personal connection.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. It helps to build a personal connection, and the way it does it makes a difference as well. What else? What's another benefit, Christina?
They get to be funny in class.
Yeah, they get to have some fun. Dan?
It immediately puts bias and preconceptions on the table to be worked with.
Ah, very good point. So it tells you a little bit about their prior learning and experience with English teachers. What else? Yes?
I just like that it starts a classroom culture from day one of students talking, right? So that means that they're already used to doing that in your class, so that in your next lesson, when you actually ask them to talk about the quote-unquote drier academic content, they've already talked, right?
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong answer here, really. I mean, we do start talking about, well, is that a factor? Is it an inference? But it's not like right answer, wrong answer. Anything else that might be a benefit to doing this?
I don't know. I think it's also breaking the stereotypes sometimes. I think maybe that's what we said already, but I think it helps them to figure out maybe that's not the case. Like you were saying, short, conservative.
Yeah.
That's a breaking of stereotypes. That's not really clear if that's true or not. So we're dealing with stereotypes and we're working on that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So it can lead to lots of other discussions as well. Kevin?
I think that maybe related to the last two comments on the students in the classroom, and I understand that you understand that things can be inferred but not be true, then I'm going to assume that maybe it is that you're not going to make those inferences on us as well.
Okay, so yeah, it can imply certain things about the behavior or the interaction between you and your students. And all of these things are absolutely accurate. There's like actually, this is such a rich activity, and anybody can do it. You might not want to put up, biology professor, probably a virgin or something like that, but you can do brainstorming. So sometimes I will ask my students, all right, take out a piece of paper. I want you to write down everything you think of when you think of X. And so X is a topic that you're going to address in the course or something else. I don't say, tell me what you know about it. I say, tell me what you think of when you hear it. And then I'll generally say, and give me at least 7 things. 7 to make them push themselves a little bit. And I do that for a couple of other reasons, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the first is, as we've mentioned, you're still teaching the subject, okay? So you're not wasting time, you are getting into the meat of the class. The second thing is, it's not always comfortable to stand up in front of a group and, talk about your sad story or whatever it is, but you can reveal things as they come up. So when a student says to me, oh, you must be rich, I can disabuse them of that. If they come up with something else, I can correct that or validate it in some way. So it's a less onerous and sort of spotlight on me type way to address things. I think what's even more important, and this has been alluded to, is that they reveal things indirectly. What they know, what they think they know, and also something about what their experience has been. Writing classes have a commonality with math-based courses in that there is a huge affective component that gets lugged along with it. Students who say they can't do math, students who say they don't know how to write. That affective component is a huge part of learning, which often gets left out in the college classroom. An illustration of this, both literally and figuratively, is that way back when, before we had all sorts of cool things on the internet, and I'd go looking for clip art, and I'd look for professor. Any ideas what came up?
All men.
All men. What else? All white men. What else? Old men. There's a theme here too. What else? Pardon me? Glasses and beards or some sort of facial hair. Suits, okay. Well, this is interesting because more often than not, yes, all those things came up, but they came up in the guise of one particular person, Einstein. And not only was it Einstein, it was only Einstein's head. It was as though there was no other part of him that was important. And I found that so interesting. It's like you stop being a person when you go into a classroom because your brain has absolutely nothing to do with any other part of you, right? And I found that so fascinating. But I know that that affect is there, and it can either help my students' learning or it can hinder it. Also, we had some twittering at the beginning, not the electronic kind, but some giggling. When people laugh, it relaxes them. It makes it easier to talk. So I know that there is a huge concern about classes becoming just opportunities to entertain people. And my argument for that is most of us like to be entertained. And so much the better if we learn something. It doesn't mean we always have to be entertaining them. But getting them laughing, having a little fun, usually a bonus for learning. It creates a safe place to reveal things. It also gives students permission to be silly, to say something outrageous that they normally wouldn't say in class, and they see how you respond to it, as somebody mentioned earlier. You know, I don't get mad at them. I don't say, oh, that's inappropriate. In fact, I say something that it's like, you know, they never think the V word would ever come out of my mouth. You know, who's going to say virgin in class? But it does, and it's sort of like, oh, I guess that means she's okay. So, wording the questions. I hedge my questions for some very good reasons. And you'll notice when I showed you the picture of Annie Sullivan, I asked you, who might this woman be? And I asked that question because I don't want them to think that if they don't have the right answer, they can't say anything. I think sometimes we inadvertently teach our students that unless you're pretty 100% sure that you know the answer, you don't say anything. We've also taught them not to answer. How do we do that?
By saying it's a wrong answer.
By saying, oh, wrong, or like, how'd you come up with that one? Okay, so our reaction is important. What else?
Not allowing enough time for them to think and to come up with an answer, like you're giving us time.
Right, I call that hang time. And it is so uncomfortable. When you're the teacher up there and it's like you hear the crickets and the students are sitting there thinking, is anybody gonna say anything? My personal belief, I have absolutely no data on this, but my personal belief is that when students are waiting, they're actually worried for us. I think they sit there thinking, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. She's standing up there and nobody's saying anything. And I think a lot of their energy gets directed into feeling sorry for you instead of paying attention to what you want them to do, which is to think of a response. So we will often jump in too quickly and give them the answer. Okay? Sometimes we rephrase the question. If you notice when I showed you the picture of Annie Sullivan, I gave you information a little bit more each time to help get you in the right direction. But I really didn't care if you could tell me it was Annie Sullivan. What I wanted you to do was to pay attention to what was up there. Because sometimes I'll even just say, well, gee, what made you think that this person was about in the 1900s maybe? What do you think? Well, the hairstyle, the clothes. Oh, you know, that's really good observation. So I reinforce for them that, you know what, you might not know the exact answer to this, but you're still using good analytical thinking. You just aren't aware that you're doing it. So I give them an opportunity to take a risk. So I word the questions in ways that sound a little less intimidating, that there's only one right answer here, folks. Not being sure is okay. That's something, as we know, they don't know about learning. It's sort of like you're supposed to know the right answer. They don't know that what all of you do is actually grapple with the things that you don't have the answers for yet. It encourages some risk-taking. And again, they realize that you don't say something nasty to them when they get it wrong or whatever. They also sometimes surprise themselves by how much they know. this is where brainstorming is very useful, because they start realizing, oh, I do know something about this. Or I thought I knew that. 3 other people in the room thought we all knew that. Oh, guess what? That isn't right. I don't feel so alone that I didn't know that wasn't right. And there are, of course, a million other benefits to doing this as well. Now, lest you think that I am totally against students having right answers, that is not the case. But if part of my goal is to get them to speculate in intelligent ways, to use what they do know and what they're learning in class, then it's okay for things like this to be hedged a little bit. Safety by collaborating. The old 2 heads. Okay, we all know that the more brain power we've got working on a problem, the more likely we are to come up with some decent solutions for it. So somebody mentioned already putting students in groups and collaborating. That's certainly one of the reasons. But that other is going back to getting them thinking about what they know. They are revealing, like when I'm going around and listening, okay, sometimes students think I'm just wandering aimlessly, but I'm actually listening not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Because again, they're revealing to me what their prior knowledge is. Now, it may not be much, it might be wrong. And knowing that it's wrong is really important, because I think it's harder to unlearn something that's wrong than to learn something from scratch. But when I ask them directly, tell me about this, they can't necessarily do it. So I don't know what they don't know. But when they're talking to each other, when they have to report out to one another, that's where I find out what they're bringing with them. The other thing is that support network it creates. I had students over the years who would tell me, you know what? The only people I ever became really close friends with were the 3 other people who were in my tutorial group in your class. We know that students drop out because of feelings of isolation. And if you also don't have a family to go back to, somebody that, whose shoulder you can cry on about, I thought I was a good student and I found out I'm not, or whatever, they need peers. They need people that they feel comfortable talking to, who they know might also be struggling. Maybe not as much, maybe not in the same way, but they're still struggling. The other thing that we can do for our students, which is part of this collaborating, is modeling for them. And one way that we can model is by putting students into groups and giving them instruction on how to act in those groups, and then to model it for them. So sitting in on the groups occasionally, seeing where they get bogged down, assigning the students roles. Now, how many of you do use small group work? Probably a lot of you, I would guess. Yeah. So often students say, I don't know what to do. Actually, it's a huge set of skills that go into creating an effective group. And again, we don't get taught those things. We're just supposed to know them. So one of the things is we assign roles. But it's really important that we tell the student what that role means. So for example, most groups will have somebody who takes the notes, the recorder. Sometimes it's the same person, but sometimes it's a different person who has to report on what the group came up with. Often the recorder is a really good role for the shy student the first time, but they don't get to stay there. So you can kind of notice and say, this person's sort of quiet. You be the recorder today, but you're going to have to rotate these roles. The second one, I think, is a really important one. And this is the devil's advocate or the doubter. And I tell the students in the description, it is your job to say yeah, but to everything your group comes up with. You get to be the pain in the backside. So when they say X, you say, well, what about Y? Or what about when she said this? Or when we read that in the text last week? That gives the student permission to take on that role, and so they don't have to worry about screwing up any relationships they might have built with one another. Because those relationships, if they're going to be supportive, they have to remain fairly intact, right? But you still want them to push each other. Give them the role, give them a definition of the behaviors that go with that role. Another student can be the fact checker. Okay, so here's the question. I want your group to try to respond to it. Be ready to cite your sources on why you came up with that response. So they go in and they check the sources, gets them using the textbook, gets them going back to their lecture notes. And the facilitator. Ironically, the facilitator is usually the person who talks the most, but in the description of the role, I tell them your role is not to give information, it's to get information out of the others. And then I can go around and remind them of that. Do you know this publication, Faculty Focus? Some of you are nodding your heads. The internet connection in here is kind of spotty, so I'm not going to try to get to it. This is a blog that you can get daily blog notes on all sorts of issues related to teaching. And most of them are super practical, evidence-based, and experience-based. So it's generally one screen of a suggestion. And so it's a very rich resource. And one of the things they reminded me of last week while I was putting this together is the power of the individual comment or note to a student. Now, I know some of you teach huge classes, so we'll start with the smaller ones first, and then we'll try to get to something that at least addresses part of this. In a smaller class, you can write a note to a student. You want to use their first names for obvious reasons. And you want the focus, if it happens to be bad news, to be on the quality of the work rather than the quality of the student. I know if I got a grade I wasn't happy with, it was like, oh, I'm a B minus. No, the paper's a B minus. No, I'm a B minus. So I try very carefully to say, you know, the work is a B minus. But I think you can do better. And I'm going to help show you how. So I'm making that personal connection. I'm also recognizing this person as an individual, not just one of the hordes. And I'm also emphasizing is the work is the issue, not the person. Now, there may be personal factors, but I don't know what they are at that point. Now, when you can address students by name, great. We used to have a faculty member here who would have every student come up in front of a camera and say their name, the name they preferred to be called by, and he memorized every one of them. I don't know about you, but I'm getting old enough that that ain't gonna happen because I won't remember their names, okay? So you can't do that when you've got 400 people in a room. But you can still normalize things for students. So for example, when you see patterns in the student's work, you can go in and say, you know what, most of you really got concept X. That's great. You said this, you said that. That's fantastic. Now, there was a significant number of you who thought this was the answer. Okay, right away I've now normalized being wrong. You weren't the only one. You're not the imposter in the room. Other people struggled with this too. And some of you responded to it in this particular way. Now, actually, that's not a bad response. Because under these circumstances, that would be a really good response. But there was a variable there that I think some of you missed. What do you think the variable was? So we go back and we look at the question, and then somebody says, oh, well, in this case, you threw in that little curve there. All right, so now that you know that that was the curve, what do you think the better answer might be? Ah, yeah, now it changes to this. Under the circumstances you were thinking, good thinking. But it wasn't the right context. I changed the context on you. Not to be tricky, but to get you thinking. So that way, at least, you're saying to them, people are struggling. You're not the only one. And these are the ways you're struggling. And it's not necessarily a right or a wrong, but a gradation of right and wrong. So good thinking up to this point. Here you missed a street sign that should have sent you this way, but you kept going in that direction instead. And last but not least, making it real or realistic. You often hear about making your expectations clear to students. Okay, we know that one really well. How many of you ask your students what their expectations are of you? A couple of you do. How do you elicit that?
do I elicit it?
Yeah, how do you get them to tell you?
I ask them what their expectations of themselves are, first of all in the course, and also of me. You know, what do you want to see out of me to help you reach your expectations? I have a little questionnaire that I give each student the first class, first day class.
Would you say in general that their expectations are realistic?
About half are.
What are some of them?
They're not very realistic at times. And both sides of the fence. Sometimes they go way low, and other times A++. You know?
Mm-hmm. So the expectation is you'll give them an A+, is that it?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay. How do you deal with that? How do you address it?
On the first day?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we actually go around the room and in discussion, and when they say, you know, I ask their expectation, how do they answer that? A++. I go, okay, that's great. So you're gonna really be demonstrating not only to me but the rest of the class, especially in your presentations, your oral presentations, that you've got that extra special A quality of work. And sometimes they'll go, well, okay, well maybe I'm an A-.
Okay, so you at least had an opportunity for that conversation to happen.
Sure, yeah, and it's everybody together in the class. Fortunately, I'm fortunate to have only 20 to 25 students in the class, so we can do it. But I have 3 classes each time. So.
Okay. That's a lot. And again, it takes time. It's also something you could do as a multiple choice outside of class, or a 1 or 2 question questionnaire for them to fill out, and then go back or in an email say, okay, in general, these are some of the things you're expecting of me. Let me tell you why, yeah, that could happen. And also let me tell you why that's not going to happen. Okay. Dan, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, well, at present I teach in a really large course, namely the Humanities Core course. And so I'm responsible for a seminar where discussion is supposed to feature centrally. And students generally assume that they go there to have the lecture clarified for them. So I don't ask their expectations of me. I rather refer to the context. So this is called a seminar or a discussion section. Just what are you understanding that we're going to do here? So that the focus isn't on any individual, but it's rather on the context.
Oh, that's a really good point. And that sort of goes back to the earlier illustration of why should you know what a seminar is supposed to be like? So that's a really good point. So again, having them put on paper or say out loud and see that their expectations might be a little unrealistic, somehow just by doing that disabuses them of them as well. Because they'll say, you know, probably you're not going to answer my email at 3 in the morning. Okay? And again, that's the opportunity for your conversation. So we've got your expectations, their expectations, but also part of being realistic is, again, going back to that modeling. And one of the areas that our students are kind of confused about, and I can understand why because I have trouble answering this question for them. The question is, how much time should I be spending on this class? Okay? How much time do you think they're supposed to be spending on your class? Any educated guesses? Yes?
Well, I had a discussion with our Director of Student Services recently, and she says that when students come in and they're failing classes, she says, well, how much time are you spending on class, outside of class? We feel I'm going to class. They can't enough. She advises them to spend a total of 12 hours a week. So if it's a 3-hour class, that would be 9 hours. I think, oh, no, I'm not doing that. And so feedback to them.
Okay, so at least they're getting something. Even if the answer isn't exactly perfect or correct, it certainly lets them compare what they're doing to what your expectation is. Anita?
I always try to mention at the beginning of my class that for this class, but in general, if you're taking a full-time load, that you should imagine that you're working somewhere between at least a 40 to 50-hour week. And that if they are also working outside and they have a job, that they need to schedule their job, but that school and studying is that full-time job as well, right? And seen the light bulbs go off, particularly in first-gen students' minds, when they're like, oh, okay, 9 hours a day is very clarifying for them, right?
Absolutely. Because they often think if they're smart, it should go quickly, right? And when we say reading, well, you move your eyes from left to right and you kind of hear the words in your head. That's a kind of reading, isn't it? Well, yeah, it is, but it's probably not the kind you're looking for. So in addition to maybe giving them a ballpark number of hours, the other thing you can do is something called a think aloud protocol. And this is especially important when it comes to reading and writing. And what you're doing is modeling how a scholar in your discipline would read a text. And you can do this in class. You can do it using UCI Replay, where it's just a text on the screen with your voiceover. You could have the TA do it in discussion section if you have a discussion section. But you actually put some text up there. You read it out loud, and as you're reading it, you're also thinking out loud the way you would as a scholar. So you'd read the line and you'd say, well, that seems ambiguous to me. I'm not sure what that means. I'm going to circle that and put a question mark and see if I get any more clarity as I keep reading. Or, who said that? Where's the evidence for that? I don't see a footnote here. Where could I look to find this? So you model or show them the type of reading that you're talking about, that it's more than just moving your eyes from left to right and getting the gist of it. The same is true for mistakes. How does a critical thinker handle a mistake? Probably not by running from the room screaming or immediately thinking, I'm an idiot, there's no way I'm ever going to get this. Now you might think, how did I miss that? You know, that was a stupid mistake. But generally then you move on from it. That's the part that students don't see. They also don't see what writing really looks like in its early stages. So if you can find an A paper from a student, redact it so that there's nothing identifying on it, and have the drafts that led to the final A paper and show them that, they have a much more realistic idea that great thoughts don't just come whole from the head down the arm and into the keyboard. That there is a lot of scratching out and starting over and sometimes totally scrapping what you began with. Seeing that makes a huge world of difference, and they even like it when you bring in your own stuff with the comments from your editors, you know, or your colleagues who have bled all over it in red pen or whatever people use these days. So seeing that reality can really help them a lot. And again, it normalizes that learning new and difficult things is in fact difficult. It is hard. Questions, comments, suggestions that you have in this one last minute that we have? Because I'm getting the signal. Yes?
The last piece of advice you were giving, and the example you were giving about giving the drafts, I'm thinking about my own experience having had a professor do that for me several years ago. But my reaction was, I can't write like this. So I'm just kind of wondering, because for me, I felt as if it was working against what you're trying to accomplish with that example.
You know, it could. And you don't have to just stick with an A paper. You can also show them a C paper and a failing paper. But what's important is that they see that it got better. That it's rare that anybody starts out with the A paper. And that's really the point that you want to make. And when I was teaching writing, I would tell my students, not all of you are interested in writing. I understand that. Some of you might not think that you have talent. But look how much better this student got just by virtue of writing drafts. And the second part that's really important is they have to get some feedback. And that's really hard in the large classes, the upper division writing courses, but you can use peer editing if you teach them how to peer edit, instead of just saying, okay, look at each other's paper and give each other feedback. I would say more often than not, it's encouraging as opposed to discouraging. But that's a good question.
So we're going to have to wrap it up because we have the last 10 10 minutes reserved for another activity, but I'm sure that Dee would be happy to continue conversations with those of you that still have questions. I would like, first of all, to thank you, Dr. Gallo.
Welcome. Thank you.
In our last 10 minutes, what we'd like to do, we'll open those doors, and if you do not yet have your First Gen College Grad t-shirt, and you are in fact a First Gen College Grad, please go grab one. We'd love it if you would try it on, and we would love it if you would take a picture. Or if you don't have a phone with you, those of us that do have phones, maybe we can mingle, we can take some pictures. We would love it if you would post on your own social media, hashtag FirstGenUCI. If you don't have social media, take the picture, email it to me. Okay, Anita Casamantes Bradford. So, and for those of you who are continuing generation college graduates but want a polo to show that you are part of this community, please grab one of those as well. And there's coffee, please have some coffee. And thank you again, all of you, for coming. Hope to see you all in the spring at our next